Shalom, continuing on with Psalm 114. This is the second of the Psalms that are recited during the Hallel service that is recited on all of the Jewish holidays except for Purim and Yom Kippur, and also on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month. Here is Psalm 114. When Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech, Judah became his holy one, Israel his dominion. The sea saw them and fled. Jordan ran backward. Mountains skipped like rams, hills like sheep. What alarmed you, O sea, that you fled? Jordan, that you ran backward. Mountains, that you skipped like rams, hills like sheep. Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flinty rock into a fountain. So here we have three main characters in this very short little play here. God, the people Israel, and nature. Nature as embodied in the earth, the mountains and hills, and the seas. The psalmist refers to the parting of the Sea of Reeds, but also to the miraculous occurrence at the River Jordan after Moses died and Joshua was leading the people across the Jordan into the Promised Land. In chapter 3 of the book of Joshua, we read of the miracle at the River Jordan where the sea essentially gathered its waters. You might think of it, at least in part, as flowing backward, gathering its waters so that the Israelites could cross through on dry land, much the way that they crossed the Sea of Reeds when they were leaving Egypt, heading towards the desert, towards Mount Sinai. Now, what is the relationship of these three main characters in our drama? Well, it is clear that God and the people Israel have a very special relationship here. So much so that God intervenes miraculously in nature and causes natural wonders in order to aid and abet the people Israel during their escape from Egypt and during their entry into the land of Israel. Nature becomes subservient to God's will in order to do God's bidding on behalf of God's people. And so nature, as part of the world or universe created by God during the creation story, nature is not independent. It is not a force separate from God, but it is a force and an entity that exists essentially to do God's bidding, subservient to God's command. It seems kind of strange to imagine that nature can reverse itself or change miraculously on behalf or to help one particular people, but this is part of the legend and myths of the Bible. It makes me think about nature and the natural world today. As I record this, terrible wildfires continue to blaze in Northern California, Oregon, and the state of Washington. Countless numbers of people have been displaced, have lost their homes, some have lost their lives. There are those who would suggest that what is going on out there has nothing at all to do with climate change, but science tells a different story. The evidence from science, from climate studies, meteorology, and the study of weather, and the effect of what we do as human beings to essentially neglect and flaunt the needs of the natural world, such that at a certain point, nature begins to become one of our greatest enemies. In the Bible, nature also could be a terrible enemy of the Israelites and the Jewish people. It is very clear, especially in the Torah, that from the predictions that Moses speaks to the people, that once they enter the promised land, if they turn their backs on the Torah, if they snub the covenant, then nature will cause them to suffer terrible consequences. The land will not yield its fruit or its produce. The skies will rain incessantly, and the people will not be able to thrive because nature will no longer rise up to their defense, but rather will cause them to suffer terribly, especially in a society that was agrarian, where they depended on the land, where they were so close to nature, and their very livelihood was based upon the cooperation of the natural world. When we neglect our covenant with the land, when we turn our backs on the reality of our partnership with God to tend the land, to take care of the natural world, but instead, when we do things that are so obviously contrary to the health of the natural world, and as such, nature begins to behave monstrously towards us. But it is not some kind of blind, chaotic force working against us. Even though such things, of course, can happen. Earthquakes, tornadoes, floods. I'm not saying that everything that happens in nature to harm human beings is our fault, but certainly some of it is. And so it's a wake-up call to all of us. In today's world, and in order to help ensure the safety and security of our children and grandchildren and beyond who live in this land, it is up to us to be cognizant and aware of how what we do affects the natural world, climate change, and so on. Something to think about as we head, as I record this now, to the beginning of a new Jewish year, 5781, with the hopes that this new year will bring about new and better beginnings for a new and better world. Thank you.